says, number 4, Jeroboam had sent his wife to the prophet Ahijah instead of one of his priests whom he had appointed. What does this reveal about his syncretistic beliefs? I had no idea what syncretistic meant. So, I asked Siri. Siri happened to know. Yeah. So I took a picture of it. It was kind of what I thought it was. Now if I can just find it, because that was 2 weeks ago. It's the fusion of diverse worldwide views into a single coherent belief system. It involves the emerging of assimilation of several originally discrete traditions, especially in theology and mythology of religion, thus asserting underlying unity. The parts that are not on this is that the Jews, the kings, were supposed to be godly and believed in theocracy. Well, he got to mix a little bit of this and a little all the other myths and the religions around him, and he didn't believe in God anymore. He just believed, I'll take the best from all these other religions. Syncretistic. It comes from synchronize. Take. So, yeah, he sent his wife because he, as the king, knew that that's not the way he's supposed to be doing, but he didn't figure that everybody would hurt a woman, wouldn't kill her right on the spot, where he might have killed him right on the spot, because the prophet knew what the king was what Jeroboam was supposed to be doing. So I was going to bring up that last week because I looked at that word. I said it 2 or 3 times. Finally, I'm just going to look it up and figure out what it means. I have a dictionary, but it's way up on the top shelf of our bookshelves, and it's a lot easier to use my phone. So now, in 2 Kings, it talks about Israel began as a unified state composed of 12 tribes of God's chosen people, but that changed when Solomon added pagan elements to the proper worship. And, he really did bring in a lot. Oh, he did. He put up small temples for his wives. In fact, I watched the show and they showed the hill that he would have built them on, built all the temples up on a certain hill. So, yeah, he introduced a lot of things and then allowed things to happen. Not just Solomon. Well, you hear Jeroboam. Yeah, right. The whole thing. His name gets repeated all the way through things that he went. Yeah, it's there have been people that have been counted as Christian theologians and writers, and that sometimes in their old age they took back or said something different. Even C.S. Lewis, some of his later writings are not quite as profoundly Christian as some of his earlier writings. And there are lots of reasons for that. Mostly has to do with your mind getting old. But, no. So the questions I read this first page made me think of Israel today. As I read through all these stories in 1st and 2nd Kings and the things that are happening, it's like they had such a great beginning and such a great foundation, and then there was a time that there was no nation of Israel until after 1948, when they were allowed to start coming back. And then you look at what's going on now. It's just a long ways from what God intended in the beginning. A long ways. It's because that did the same. They're a byproduct of what happened after Solomon. They just kept getting farther and farther away from the truth, and God became less and less important. Now, they still had the traditions. You still had the same feast days, and you carried out all those things. But in their heart, they weren't the same. Even today, the traditional Jews, the ones that go to they call it the Wailing Wall, which is the old foundation of the temple that Solomon built. And they pray because they feel that the Messiah is going to come back and he's going to make him into a great nation again. And they believe that. And when it comes a holy day, one of those feasts they're supposed to, they observe it. But he's not going to come back and make a kingdom of Israel. Yeah. Yeah, it's they're blinded, which is what God said in the word would happen, and that it looks like you'd think if you went back and read this history, and they believe all this stuff in the Old Testament. I mean, they take that as gospel truth, so to speak. But they can't not see, even looking at that, accepting that as truth, that the Messiah is going to come to earth again, but not going to come to start his kingdom. They reject him the first time because he didn't do it. Yeah, it does. And God said, I sent to them a vision so they would not be able to understand the truth if it hit them right in the head. I've been in tests in college in some of those classes that the truth, it was right there, but but I didn't see it. Especially on the tests and stuff. It's like, sometimes I'd say, I know I was supposed to study this. And then I know I did study this, but it didn't happen. But it just, my heart was heavy reading through all these things, thinking about what's going on today. If Israel had turned to God, had become a godly nation like God intended for them to be, he would still be fighting for them on their side, and what's going on wouldn't be the same. It would still be bad. The Arabs would still be trying to take care of them and eliminate them, but they would be more positive. Now, they don't take anything from anybody. You know, you can make fun of and do stuff to almost any other nation, but Israel's they're going to strike back. They're not going to just let you. Do you remember what year was it? The Olympics, when the Arabs broke into the Jewish compound there at the Olympics and killed some athletes and took a bunch of them hostage. And I remember, what are we going to do? I wonder what we're going to do. And they sent soldiers around there, but if everybody comes in, they're all going to be dead. And everyone was standing around wringing their hands. Then you got the news one morning the Israeli soldiers had gone in and captured all the Arabs. And sure, some of their people had died, but all those who did, they all died. That's kind of the way, that's not new. If you just read through 1st and 2nd Kings, that's exactly what happened. You may get me here, but before it's over with, I'm going to get you. And so Israel, they don't back down. Was it 1973 when Egypt attacked it? They're going to have this great giant war. Was it 10 days? Yeah. Yeah. That's right. When you're reading through 2nd Kings, they mention Syria. Syria is still Syria, and some of the other countries. Yeah, they're just same story, different day. But and some of those, if they had done like they were supposed to when they first went into the Promised Land and killed all of them, it would be different. Yep. And he said, all this and this and this and this, and when they were all gone, then sure, there's still been battles, But they're still fighting in the time of all these kings after David and Solomon, fighting the same people that they'd been fighting since they set up the kingdom. I guess some things that we can learn from that is that, first of all, God is with you whether you're doing what you're supposed to be doing or not. Sometimes we may say something or do something, make a decision. We say, oh man, maybe that's not the right one. Oh, God's not mad at me. Well, he's not. He may not. It may not work out like you wanted to, but God was still with Israel and blessed him. Another thing we can learn is that when God says to wipe them out, we need to just wipe them out. If we do what he says, it's amazing how well things work out sometimes. When you plant a field, it's different today. I was watching some things on farming. I don't know why this time of year. I was doing back to my grandpa, the little two-row corn picker that you pulled behind the tractor. Then you had the wagon pulling behind that one, and that was a big upgrade from how we did it before. And that was, we used to pick it by hand, then you throw it in the wagon. When you couldn't hit the wagon anymore, you moved the wagon. Yeah. And they had this little thing you put in your hand. I couldn't make that work. It hurt my hand, so I just did it by hand. But they got these machines that do half a field in one swipe. It's like it's different. Yeah, right. Yeah, but yeah, I remember the they were the rows were farther apart, and the stalks were much farther apart. I mean, now than they're right, which is fine. They've come up with a way so that works. But it's a lot of work and a lot of things. You just have to keep doing the same thing every year. If you decide to think, well, I'm going to fertilize this year, and you skip part of the field because you're just tired, or you ran out, you don't want to go back and get more. The corn will grow, or the beans will grow, but you'll have this sick part right in the middle someplace. And that's kind of what Israel did. They didn't really completely obey God in anything. A lot of things they did really good, but they didn't really follow through on anything at all. Now, you probably never said to your parents at all ever about anything that, well, I meant to do that, or that's what I thought I was doing. I tried to do that when we really just did what we wanted to do and didn't want to go anymore. Yeah. Yeah, Elijah was a great man. You remember the battle they had on Mount Carmel, and yeah, we'll talk about those in a minute here. Did for individuals. Uh, yeah, so, no, Elijah served God and did some fantastic things. He had everybody knew God was on his side, and he had an apprentice, Elisha. Boy, it's like having grandsons called Jamison and Jaden, and a son called Jeremy. Sounds really good in the beginning.
But it's hard to remember. Yeah.
We had a family in our church in Quincy, Michigan, that 9 children. They all started with T. One girl, Tori, but it's like, I asked Dan, I said, now you just start at the top and go down all the way through the whole list every time. Elijah and Elisha.
And everybody says, now which one was first? Which one was second?
Well, Elijah, the J comes before the S. So that's how you remember that. It's not original with me. I had a teacher tell me that so that we could remember. And so God was with Israel, but they didn't do what they were supposed to do. He did a great miracle. The army had come in, and General Naaman had captured a bunch of Israelites, and then he became a leper. And one of the little slave girls said, well, if you do the prophet in Israel, let's go there and he can heal you. So they started towards the capital, and the king heard and saw the scout said, the army's coming. It's like, oh no, he's coming for, but he wasn't. Yes, and the letter was, now he's coming here to kill me. And so they went to Elisha's house, and he said, well, tell him to come out here and heal me. And Elisha said, I don't need to do that. Just go tell him to dip 7 times in the Jordan and he'll be okay. And that wasn't what he wanted to hear. Well, basically bow to him and pray in front of him. And so Elisha said no. So the king got mad and turned around going to go home. And the little servant girl said, he'd ask you to do something big and mighty and glorious. Would you have done it? Well, sure, but we got rivers in Syria that are cleaner than this. And she said, but that's not the point. So he went in 7 times, he dipped, and he came out. His skin was white as snow. I can imagine probably after 5, he was ready to go home. And this little girl said, you just got 2 more. And it was. And so he went 7 times, and then he tried to give Elisha payment. Elisha said, no, I don't need it. Take it home. And so then Gehazi, his servant, ran after and said, well, my master changed his mind. And said he'd take a little bit here, some gold and some silver. And so he gave it to him, and then he went and back to Elisha's compound where Elisha lived and dug a hole and buried it. It's interesting in the Bible, when people are trying to hide something, they always dig in a hole, but it never hid it from God. And so he came in, and Elijah said, where you been? Oh, nowhere. I was just out walking. And Elijah said, no, you weren't. And he told him what he did, and he said, because of that, you're going to have the leprosy that Naaman had, and he did. God still loved Gehazi, but he wasn't going to allow him to stand what he did because he lied, he cheated, he stole, and so God suffered, caused him to suffer because of that. Numerous times in these chapters you read about Ben-Hadad, and he just never learned his lesson, did he? He just kept coming, getting defeated one way or the other, going back home, and after a while he'd come back again. And so the Syrians under Ben-Hadad came, and I love this story. They were all camped outside the city, and there were 4 lepers who were dying of hunger. And they said one to another, they have food in that camp. Well, let's go ask them for something to eat. What's the worst thing that can happen? They're going to kill us. If we don't go get anything to eat, we're going to die right here. So nothing wrong. We have no choice. So they went to the camp. When they got there, the Lord caused the Assyrians to hear horses and chariots and soldiers coming, and when these four guys walked in the camp, there wasn't anybody there. And so they started eating. And after a while, they said, we're not doing, this isn't very good because our people are starving inside the wall there. Maybe we ought to go share this with them. And so they did. Shows me that, God can use anything and anybody. Sometimes we look at people who God's using, doing wondrous things. Boy, they must have been a really great person, or they must have a really great education, or came from a really great home. Most of them didn't, because God used them anyway. So when we get thinking that, well, God can't use me because I don't have, or I can't do, or what. When I'm sure you've seen the same before. When you get to the point that you don't have anything but God, then you can get started. When you've lost everything except God, then now you're at a point He can use you. And I've learned that in big ways and little ways, that it's like, when you get down the point that, well, God, I don't have anybody else to turn to but you, and said, well, finally. And then He takes care of us. These 4 lepers, they weren't heroes. They were just hungry. And God was the one that made the blessing. I'm going to read some on page 33, 53. In spite of God's grace and mercy, Ben-Hadad II was displeased with his failure to conquer the people of Israel. Middle of page 53. So he gathered his army for a massive siege against Samaria. Syria's chariots and soldiers surrounded the city, cutting off food and supplies and causing a great famine. In this turn of events, the next day, the Lord miraculously sent the army of Syria fleeing for fear, leaving their garments and weapons behind. This time when Ben-Hadad got home, they killed him. There was no explanation for that. That was not being a great general. God did that. And, through these books we've read, 1st and 2nd Kings, there were a number of times that God wiped out the whole army. One time He sent an angel did. It killed 185,000 of them. Others, it doesn't really tell us what happened. It just happened. Yeah. We're kind of like Gehazi. Elisha, what are we going to do now? Look at all these people. Elisha said, Lord, open his eyes just a little bit. So he opened his eyes. He looked around. There was surrounded by angels, chariots of fire. And then Gehazi's eyes closed again. We don't see him, but God has us surrounded too. Yeah. Yeah. I have my life, when I think about it afterwards and things are over, that there are lots of times I could have been injured, or when injured worse than I was. Mostly the injuries came because I was doing something stupid, or on the line between should and shouldn't do. I had a man I worked with in Home Depot. He was a department head, and there were certain things. He said, now, this is the line. You can't cross that line. Well, he never crossed it. He put his foot on one side of it, reached his other foot as far as he could, but he never completely went across the line. I've done some of those things, and God saved me and protected me. A lot of things that happen we don't see, we don't know that God is with us, but He is. And Joram, everybody seemed to blame the prophets because they were obeying God, and what they did didn't sit well with the kings because the kings weren't obeying God. And so let's pick on the guys that are doing the right thing and get rid of them, then that way everything will be better. I have known of men and women who were fired from their job mostly because they were doing the right things the right way. And there's a group of them that weren't and didn't want it, so they just kind of started a rumor and saying it, and they ended up losing. Yeah, when like Saul, when Saul asked a question, Samuel answered it, but that wasn't the question. That wasn't the answer Saul wanted. And so there, Jehu, who you read of numerous times in here, and Jehu was not a real follower of God, but he did obey what God wanted him to do. And it tells us that Jehu's job was to take care of and eliminate some of all these people that were following Baal. And so in that, he did that. Jehu did not walk with God in the Lord's ways, but God used him to fulfill his purposes. Then the death of his mother, Athaliah, this is a real grandma at heart, isn't it? She seized the opportunity to take her fortune and quickly killed all of her grandchildren, so there wouldn't be anybody left to take her place. There were no cookies at Grandma's house, not with her. And because, and that, as always happens, it tells us that, but there was one who the priests took aside and raised in the temple. God has always had his remnant or his one. When they thought they were all gone, they were all dead. Yeah, but yeah, it's I guess the thing you see when you read through the Old Testament, especially these books that we're reading, is you see the same thing over and over again. It's just different faces, but the same story. Yeah, you'd think that after a while they'd get the message. That maybe there is a better way or something else to do. But they didn't. And they were always against Elijah. This is sort of a personal illustration. My father-in-law, I just wanted, all those listed kings of the house of Judah and how long they learned on page 52 and all that. And then all those on page 54, the Assyrian kings. We had to learn those when I was in college in Old Testament survey. Now that was a waste of time, because the only time you ever used it was when they asked you to write it down on a test. I have a list right here. I don't need to remember it. And there are lists in other books you don't really need to remember it. Where I went to school, everybody took Greek for 2 semesters, first semester and second semester. 4 days a week you took at an hour of Greek. And then when you get done, if you want to go farther, you can get your next semester, your third semester, it was just 3 days a week. And when you get finished, you really know a lot of Greek. And I still remember some of it. But we spent so much time on conjugating verbs and what this Indian and all that and this and this. So then when I got in seminary, we took Greek again. We covered everything that we covered in those 3 semesters in 2 weeks. He said, that's not really important. All you need to know is the vocabulary and know how to read it. I thought, what a waste of time. But sometimes that happens, but God is always in charge. My father-in-law was pastor in a church in Danville, Illinois, which is where Marilee was born, and Heather was born in the same hospital. They weren't right next to each other, but they were a few years apart. And he was called to church in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was a bigger church in a lot bigger area. And so he started pastoring there. There was a group of men, I think there were 5 of them, who decided after they got him there and he was preaching that they didn't like the way that he was preaching. And they tried to get rid of him. Now, there were a lot of people at the church, and most of them did not agree with that, but these men some of them were on the boards, some of them were longtime members. So they started trying to get rid of him. It got to the point that these 5 men and their families were having church in the basement while the regular church was going on upstairs. It's the only instance I ever heard that sometimes they'll go down the street, but see, they felt it was their church, and so they were holding services in the basement and the little auditorium down there while the rest of the church was going on. And things came to a head, and those 5 men eventually they left the church. They did some awful things, said some awful things to a lot of people who'd been their friends for a long time, and about Pastor Seidler and his family and all this having going on. It's interesting. Out of those 5 men, only one of them lived to be 65 years old. Some of them died of diseases that you have to look up in the dictionary to be able to pronounce it. And the one who was the real leader, sadly, his daughter, one of Marilee's best friends, but he died a horrible death. He's divorced. And it was kind of a vindication that, we do not know what God is doing in the background. God is working. And what's the verse in Romans that says, I'm back on. Getting ready to blame Alec, but it's my that it seemed like there's no way that this is going to end up good. But it did. Or anyway, it ended up gooder than I thought it was going to. What the old lady said, giving her testimony, she said, being a Christian is just gooder and gooder and gooder. And the pastor said, well, that's not very good. He said, no, it may not be, but it's an awful good position to be in. And so, in chapters 4, 5, and 6 here, there are, in the middle of all this chaos and disobedience and killing, and there's some stories that God brings out. Number one, about the widow and the oil. Elijah said, what do you have? She said, I have 1 pitcher of oil left, and that's it. So he said, well, go borrow as many vessels as you can. It's like, well, if you walked up those stairs, you must be really dedicated. Thank you. Guys. Thank you. And so she went to her neighbors and found anything that she'd hold oil and brought it in the house. Samson said, now close the door, and they closed the door. He said, now just start filling those vases and those pots and those lamps. I'd like to have been there to watch her face. Yeah, it just keeps going. And then when they finally got to the last one, this one was full, but there wasn't anything else. That was it. And did this woman deserve that more than any of the rest of them did? If God came to your house, or Samuel or Elisha or someone came to your door and said, I want you just to go borrow as many empty jars as you can. If you come to Matt's house, Matt may have some empty jars sometimes. Or he's looking for empty jars, one or the other. Go borrow all those jars you can, and if you bring them in here, we're going to fill them with oil. It took some faith for her to do that. And the people just asking, what are these for? She basically could say, I really don't know. But she saw a miracle of God, mostly because she was obedient. Then there was a man that they had a woman, she had a child because she prayed for one, and Elisha prayed, and she had a baby, and then the baby died. So child died. And then the woman was really hurt. And she said the same thing. It had been better if you didn't give me this son, if he's just going to die on me. And so Elisha healed him. Then the pot of stew that they put on to boil, and the son of the prophets found some herbs that he had never seen before, so he thought, well, I'll just put these in the stew. Now that's something you see on cartoons. Here, I have no idea what this is, but let's put it in the stew. It looks good. And when they started eating the stew, what happened? They started getting sick. So Elijah said, go out there and get some other things. And he threw them in there, and sort of the people and everything was good. Then I put circles around these. Number 4, Elisha fed 100 men. And he said, go ahead and give it to these people they may eat. And the servant looked at him and said, what shall I do that set this before 100 men? He said again, give it to the people that they may eat, and thus says the Lord, and they shall eat and have some left over. And they did. Yeah. This is the precursor to what we read in the New Testament. Yep. And some of the followers of the Lord, they hadn't gotten any wiser after all these years. The disciples, that's the same thing. Yep. And then Naaman was healed. But the greatest miracle in the whole Bible, the smartest man in the Bible, this guy, the prophets, the house that the prophets lived in was too small, so they're building a new one. And to do this, they were chopping trees. And so they were chopping, and all of a sudden, this one guy's, the head flew off his axe and went in the water. Now, if he had been, some people I know, he just kept whacking with the handle because it makes a lot of noise. It looked like he was really working. But he was smart enough to, when the head came off, he said, oops, I can't do it. The axe fell in the water. And so Elisha said, where did it fall? He said, well, just about right there. So Elijah threw a stick in the water, and it floated to the top. Now, that doesn't work today because I've tried things like that. When I've lost something, it doesn't float to the top. But the axe head float to the top, and Elijah said, okay, go get it. So he reached out, and they got it. I've known people who were very active in what they called the Lord's work, and they were busy, and they were loud. But they really didn't get anything. They left their axe head back in the shop. They didn't really do anything for the Lord. When something happens that seems like it's going to ruin what we're doing, the best thing to do is just stop and find out what God wants you to do. And that's what he did. Yep, it's in these chapters that we've read, so for just this first part, God blinded the army more than one time, the opposing army. This last time that the Syrians were there, King of Syria was making war against Israel, and he said, go surround them, so they did. He sent, down to verse 14, he says, they sent horses and chariots and a great army there, and they came by night and surrounded the city. And when the servant of God arose early in the morning and went out, there was an army surrounding his city and horses and chariots. And his servant said to him, alas, my master, what shall we do? Seems like a pretty fair question. And so what did his master say, Elisha? Do not fear, for those who are with us are who are more than those who are with them. Romans 8:31. If God be for us, who can be against us? If God be for us, who cares who's against us? And so God said, Elisha prayed and said, Lord, just open his eyes just a little bit here again. He opened his eyes, and the young man saw, behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire, so that when the Syrians came down to him, Elisha prayed the Lord, and they strike the people. I pray with blindness. And that's what happened. And they rode away. I don't know that God's striking people today with blindness, but He is still in the business of helping His people and taking care of us. How many of you have been in a car accident that could have been a lot worse? I think most of us have been. Even if it was really bad, it could have been worse. And so we need to be thankful, realize God is always interested. Elisha dies. That's one of my little favorite tidbits in that chapter 13. Elisha died and they buried him. And the raiding bands from Moab invaded the land in the spring of the year, so it was that they were burying a man, and suddenly the enemy was coming, so they just threw him in the tomb with Elisha. And so they put the man in the tomb of Elisha, and when the man was let down and touched the bones of Elisha, he stood and he was alive. Now that would have been an exciting time. Wait a minute. I might have thought, let's go get somebody else that we know. But Elisha was still doing miracles after he died. And there are men and women today who, because of their testimony and what they did, we're still reaping the benefits of it today. There are some people that you might not expect, I wouldn't look to, that have done some miraculous things. Diary of Anne Frank, who saved all those Jews. And then probably the movie that touched me the most, that I still, every time I think about watching it, brings tears to my eyes, was Schindler's List. The hundreds of thousands of men and women that he saved by what he did. And how that, I don't know whether he's a Christian or not, but God used him. The Germans paid him to save these people's lives who they were trying to kill. And there are Christians who are preaching around the world, Christians in Nigeria this morning that are preaching the word even though their church is burnt down and they're being killed just because they're Christians. Their testimony goes on after them. And so it may seem as if nothing you're doing is going to have any lasting effect. But we don't know what God knows. If you had children, have children, or have grandchildren, then you still have work that's important to do, to take care of and to train. One of the questions he has in this book, the Reflections, we must train the next generation to serve the Lord. One critical step, that is, the mentor trains the people to rely on God rather than on human counselors. I've known a number of people that when their mentor died, so did their Christianity. Because they were... Hezekiah, in the midst of what then was going on, and he said, basically, he turned his face to the wall and said, God, I got a lot to do. Don't kill me. Don't let me die.
But he's been a good king. He's done a lot of things. He really tried. Very hard.
Yes.
That's what he was telling God. He found out he was going to die. Sick. Prophet came and told him, yep, you're going to die. And he faced the wall and he told God, hey, I've served you. I've got rid of all this stuff. I followed you. I do what you say. Basically, was asking for more what we can ask for, time. Time. And he turns to the wall and tells God all this. Before the guy got through, what was it, the courtyard or something,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere, before he got very far, the prophet did. God came to him and said, hey, I'm going to give you 15 more years. Really, he said he's going to see some of his family taken.
it
You gained 15 more years. So wait a minute, what does that tell us about? Can God change his mind about what he's doing? He can't. He changed his mind ahead of time. But he needs the right. He looked at the person in Kings. He didn't have to look at the nation. The nation wasn't following him. But he looked at the people. And he's looking at you. Just remember that.
yeah, and you know, I had someone ask me, well, why didn't Hezekiah ask for more years? Well, he didn't ask for any years. God gave him 15. So that's the case. I've got till 95, so I'm going to be okay. I got a few years to go. But
I kind of took away from that we get time. We don't get to live forever.
no, we do not. I don't know. You don't want to live forever here. But
Live as whatever you want to call it,
and you know,
whatever we are.
and death is not the worst thing that we'll face.
No.
It seems to be, oh, that's the worst. What? Not really. Watching someone that you love go through something that they didn't have to go through, but because of their lifestyle they chose, and this is what happened. The consequences. No, that's to me that's worse than death. And so we need to, just as you look through all this stuff, to me, in the middle of all this chaos going on, God has these 5 or 6 little incidents. He deals with individuals.
But Hezekiah wasn't the best that they ever had. There's one to come next week that was better.
Yeah.
Much more. But he didn't. God was mad at him by that time.
Yeah, I
That
did.
didn't matter.
Remember I told you there were 19 kings in the south, 19 kings in the north? And how many good kings did they have in the northern 10 tribes? None. Maybe there's a couple. And how many kings did they have in the south out of 19? Well, there were 5.
Different degrees of goodness to it.
So, yeah, there actually are 5. They say in the book here he said 4, but I might disagree with him. But the point is that
You said 5 last
that's right. Israel has been led and protected by God for thousands of years. And that far from Solomon or David, they already got turned their back on the point that God can't find a good man.
Didn't they get, the northern tribe got carried off in this, right?
The northern 10 tribes got carried off in 722.
During
The southern 2 tribes got carried off in 586, so they were around for another couple hundred years.
the next king goes up north and tears down high places up there too.
Yep. So it's a great story when you look and feel like God's still in control. All right, let's pray. Father, as we've looked in your word this morning at how you dealt with people and deal with people, we are your people. Help us that we might allow you to work in our hearts and our lives, Lord. And that to live with the attitude that if God's for us, then we don't really care who's against us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.